right now, as we're gathered, go ahead and take a look at the person next to you at the next table and think to yourself, how many of these people at one time or another worked at a high school newspaper or a college newspaper? Or both? Now think back to any restrictions placed on your ability to report the news. In a landmark 1988 U.S. Supreme Court decision of Hazelwood School District versus Kohlmeyer, which gave administrators the right to remove news they deemed unacceptable. The court said students' First Amendment rights were not being violated because a school newspaper is a, quote, learning tool, unquote. During the past 2 years, defenders of the First Amendment have been fighting back with a wave of legislation called New Voices, which ensures the protection of a free press and free speech rights for students, teachers, and administrators who believe in open discussion of controversial issues. In 2016, this movement began in Nevada with University of Nevada Reno journalism professor Patrick File, an expert in media law and First Amendment issues. He saw how New Voices was taking shape in many states and strongly felt the Nevada legislature should pass this legislation. Patrick needed a champion in the legislature, and State Senator Nicole Cannizzaro of Las Vegas stepped up to work with Patrick to introduce the bill and shepherd it through both the Assembly and State Senate. Nevada had been at ground zero with the student journalists' rights, and maybe some of you remember back in 2010, the Churchill County Educators Association in Fallon tried to suppress an article in the student newspaper written by then-editor Lauren Draper. Lauren and the Lahontan Valley News in Fallon became embroiled in a battle over an article she wrote about students being withheld from a music competition she called Firegate. Lucky for Lauren, though, both the superintendent and principal in Churchill County backed Lauren's right as a journalist and allowed the story's publication. And for those of you who may remember this, the story went national. As for this past spring, Nicole, Patrick, Lauren, Reno High School teacher Christy Briggs, and two of her students, Allie Weems and Taylor Pittman, testified before the Assembly and State Senate Education Committees, as did representatives from both the Clark and Washoe County School Districts, the Nevada Press Association, and an organization that deals with community newspapers across the country called the International Society of Weekly Newspaper Editors. They all testified in favor of this New Voices legislation, and others behind the scenes were just as active. So in true Nevada bipartisan fashion, the bill passed Senate 21-0, and the Assembly 30-11. In June, Governor Brian Sandoval signed the legislation. So at this time, I would like to recognize Christy Briggs, Taylor Altman, and Lauren Draper. Atlee Weems is away at college, for their conviction in testifying before the State Senate and Assembly on behalf of New Voices. Ladies, would you please come up? Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present this year's award of First Amendment Champions to Nicole Cannizzaro and Patrick File for their support in knowing the First Amendment does not end at the school's front door for young, aspiring journalists.
remarks. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who was able to help get this piece of legislation through both the state Senate and the Assembly. It was quite the uphill battle for any of you who had the chance to watch some of the testimony. At times, it felt like a scene from the paper chase in terms of the question and answer back and forth. But luckily, I wasn't alone in helping to explain why this legislation is so important for our student journalists, how important it is to protect the First Amendment. My thanks will forever go out to Lauren, Taylor, and Christy for their help with this, and certainly to Patrick for his help in helping to get this piece of legislation passed. And so thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to be standing here with Patrick, who was really amazing in all of this. So.
I'm just going to say three things. One, of course, is thank you to Senator Cannizzaro, to Steve, who is sort of seemingly unnamed in his own speech about this effort. He was tremendously helpful and with his perspective as an editor, as a champion of the First Amendment himself, as well as a former educator. He had a lot to say and a lot to kind of help with this. Also, thank you. I want to mention Barry Smith's help with this effort on behalf of Nevada Press Association. I hope that you, as members, appreciate the work that he does here in Carson City and sort of what an amazing asset he is to the press of this state on that front. So that's one thing, and we should applaud him. The second is that this law goes into effect on October 1st, so I very happily look forward to seeing all the announcements in the statewide press about this bill going into effect on October 1st and informing students and citizens of the towns of Nevada that this bill is now law. And thirdly, I just want to say that I think part of what drew Senator Cannizzaro to this was less about the sort of imperiled rights of student journalists sort of operating under the dark cloud of censorship. I think as Christy, as a student media advisor, will say, it's not often, or not always the case that sort of, administrators are wielding big red pens. It was as much about civic education. We are facing, I think, a crisis of civic education in this country. And I think it's something that this makes a small inroad, hopefully, on addressing that problem. That civic literacy and media literacy are things that we need to take seriously in our schools. And hopefully you, as the press, can help address that and sort of take this as a small gleaming light of empowerment to try and do that. And so that is my urge to you tonight, to think about ways that we can be doing that. So thank you very much.